Good afternoon, y'all, and welcome to this latest reading of George Jackson's Blood in My Eye. Last time we did stop on page 22, uh, right in the beginning of the second paragraph there, so we'll be picking up from there. If you join us in the live reading, appreciate that. You can find the reading in the pinned section of the chat. And if you're following me on the YouTube, thank you as well. We're going to make sure that PDF is in the description for y'all. So, without further ado, let's continue with our Blood in My Eye, George Jackson reading. Consciousness is the opposite of indifference, of blindness, blankness. Promoting consciousness involves the general dissemination of the concept that each of us is part of a universal action and interaction, that poles are somewhere connected, that there are material causes for trauma, vertigo, degenerative disease. Connections, cause and effect, clarity on their relation and interrelations, the connections with the past, continuity, flow, movement, the awareness that nothing remains the same for long. And it follows that if a thing is not building, it is certainly decaying. That life is revolution, and that the world will die if we don't read and act out its imperatives. Not on its own will it die, but rather because the forces of reaction have created imbalances that will kill it. Quote, the seeds of its own destruction. Close quote. Our destruction too, in the epoch of the bomb, the nerve gases, the massive precipitation of industrial waste. Consciousness is knowledge, recognition, foresight, common experience and perception, sensibility, alertness, mindfulness. It stirs the senses, the blood, it exposes and suggests. It will objectify, enrage, direct. There are no positive formulas for a thing so complex. We have guidelines only to help us with its growth. This means that after we are done with our books, they must be put aside, and the search for method will depend on observations, correct analyses, creativity, and seizing the time. Sometime after the December 4th, 1969 shootout around the Panther Party Los Angeles quarters, Jonathan commented on the connection, the aftermath. Have you grasped the significance of the backlash? It has stung the fascists. The people are informant, all of them, all of persuasion. They don't dig midnight or dawn raiding parties, bullets with steel jackets, cowardly pigs perched upon their roofs. The same gas is manufactured for use against the Vietnamese liberators blowing back into their faces. Repression. Do you see the effect it has on the uncommitted? Comrade, repression exposes. By drawing violence from the beast, the Vanguard Party is demonstrating for the world to examine just exactly what terms their rule is predicated on. Their power to organize violence, our acquiescence. But check. Blacks are conditioned to acquiesce. They have in general been led to believe that this system is the product and property of the white man, that the white man will protect it with his all, that the white man is a killer, a reflex killer, that all we could ever hope for is reforming or expanding of the system to include the few of us who can make ourselves acceptable. It's too big for us. You can't fight City Hall. It can't happen in America. And all that last shit. Pig shit. Double check. All of the objective conditions are present here in the black colony for revolution. The physical thing. Want and want to. The real feeling, not the various pretenses. East Los Angeles hasn't changed a bit since you were out. Watts is still a depressed area. Many of the West Side districts are starting to resemble the older black districts. The issue of employment is still the same. We do 30 to 40% of the nation's work for 1% of the returns, and a huge pool of us is always kept unemployed to reduce the value of the labor of those who are. Just like 10 years ago, just like 1864 to 1865, when we were thrown on the labor market, hungry, ragged, crowded in the clapboards, and unhappy. Nothing has changed since you left the street, comrade. Not in this respect, at least. Perhaps our condition stands out a little more glaringly, that's all. but you know what's been building. The vanguard has viciously attacked the system, the omnipotent system attacked by the slave. Sort of like the worker bee growing so disgusted with the quality of his life that he turns and attacks the bear. The other bees will understand. They do understand. And all sorts of bees, even those who thought the bear their rightful ruler, see him differently when he foams at the mouth and bites at his own tail. I think you were on the right track with the idea concerning repression. It has to be a part of the revolutionary process, a necessary stage in the development of revolutionary consciousness. The situation being as it was and is, the black experience is what I'm referring to here. The milder lynch example type repression is accepted by us as a necessary part of life, but the new harsher thing thought on by the political thrust of the vanguard party serves to show even the most tractable of the reformers among us that firstly, the system will not or actually cannot meet our demand. Secondly, it clearly illustrates the real terms of our existence under capitalism, the nature of it, and how foul a piece of the pie would be even if we could have some. One fundamental problem remains: the survival of the vanguard party, and I mean in good form. We must think to the righteous fielding of a clandestine army. John. Lenin, Guevara, and Fanon, all in their particular fashion, postulate that before revolution can take place, all other forms of redress must be exhausted, clearly exhausted. Electoral processes must have broken down. The confidence of the electorate in any of the older forms completely shattered. Confidence in the ability of the old system to honestly organize any aspect of public life must be shaken to the core. Years and years ago, it may have been an acceptable tactic to organize a people's ticket of solid worker and revolutionary credentials and arm it with an ideal platform, only to be defeated by a mudslinging opportunist warlord, demonstrably inferior, scum-willing pig. Then pass out a pamphlet to explain to the people how the system has failed them, or speak it in Pershing Square, or years ago in the campus hall. Today, it is not a tactic, it is counter-revolution. After 40 years, it's pretty clear that it will not suffice. Years ago, working with and attempting to influence union leadership may have been judicious, but the government has long since infiltrated and bought off this leadership and legislated a way to strike. Union hall speeches and pamphlet passing are playing at revolution. It isn't revolutionary or materialist to disconnect things. To disconnect revolutionary consciousness from revolutionizing activity, to build consciousness with political agitation, an educational issue alone is idealistic rather than materialist. When any election is held, it will fortify rather than destroy the credibility of power brokers. When we participate in this election to win instead of disrupt, we're lending to its credibility and destroying our own. With all the factors of control over the electoral process in the hands of the minority class, the People's Party can always be made to seem isolated, unimportant, and even extraneous. If these tactics still give the appearance of revolution to some after decades of miscarriage, we are justified in replacing them as vanguard. When people begin to express their disgust at the demagogic and reformist maneuvers of the vanguard parties, they will discover in real action a new form of political activity which in no way resembles the old. These politics are the politics of leaders and organizers living inside history who take the lead with their brains and their muscles in the fight for freedom. These politics are revolutionary and social, and these new facts which the native will now come to know exist only in action. They are the essence of the fight, which explodes the old colonial truths and reveals unexpected facets, which brings out new meanings and pinpoints the contradictions camouflaged by these facts. The people engaged in the struggle who, because of it, command and know these facts, go forward, free from colonialism and forewarned of all attempts at mystification, inoculated against all national anthems. Violence alone, violence committed by the people, violence organized and educated by its leaders, makes it possible for the masses to understand social truth and gives the key to them. Without that struggle, without that knowledge of the practice of action, there's nothing but a fancy dress parade and the blare of the trumpets. There's nothing save a minimum of readaptation, a few reforms at the top, a flag waving, and down there at the bottom, an undivided masses still living in the Middle Ages, endlessly marking time. It's interesting what he's getting into here, because he's getting into this idea that revolution is a material reality, and that you have to organize for it materially. Quote, he says, quote, "It isn't revolutionary or materialist to disconnect revolutionary consciousness from revolutionizing activity, to build consciousness with political education and educational issue making alone is idealistic rather than materialist." You can't, while pushing for greater political education, divorce that education for the need for praxis in the moment. You got a lot of organizations to this day who talk about political education and they put forward strong political education programs, but their praxis in the field is lacking. And so like they got a bunch of people who like are bookworms and they understand like the theoretical aspect of building our movement, but they don't have a relationship to the people, they're not out in the community. So that must be properly understood and wrestled with. In the general retreat to avoid full commitment, right, the discomfort on a river, some have raised a debate among us that has generated into name-calling, quoting the same authorities to validate diametrically opposed ideas, and ultimately creating a process dividing us into two mutually exclusive or contradictory groups. The overall effect is to reduce us to caricature. Where more than one individual is involved in a life situation, the fact of subjectivism will always make differences based on opinion and interpretation. A problem in exchanges and reaching the necessary means for the initiation of collective activity. Some debate will always be carried on. However, on the basics, we must somehow agree or nothing will get done. All opinions are not of equal value, and there is such a thing as counterproductive revisionism. Stupidity is not unknown to our long-range political policy makers. Participation in electoral politics organized by the enemy state, after recognizing that the whole process must be discredited, a conditional step into revolution, and particularly participation that tends to authenticate this process, is the opposite of revolution. It's a tactic for the ultra-rightists. With history as a guide, we should never make such monumental. The history of the U.S., the blood-soaked, urine-steeped essence of its being, the wreckage and demise of its human character under the wheels of a 200-year-old headlong flight with heedless, frightened animals at the controls of a machine that has mastered them, allows for no appeal on a strictly ideological level. George Wallace or Adolf Hitler would figure at the polls of an honest election in Tom Hayden. But again, what is an honest election after the effect of monopoly capital? What is an honest election after the fact of monopoly capital? I'll leave that for y'all to decide. Repression is indeed a part of revolution, a natural aspect of antithesis. The always to be expected defense attack reflex of the beleaguered, toothless tiger. All arguments against this fundamental fact are false and labored to the point of being completely illogical. Can power be seriously challenged without a response? Would a robber baron, the tycoon, the Führer allow us to seize his privilege without resistance? Can we steal it away from the greatest bandits of all time with sleight of hand alone? Incredible. The fascists understand the value of mass psychology, are familiar with its use, and hold all the important implements of its effective control. But they are not aware of our existence and our general strategy regarding the reaching of people. The whole situation can be reduced to a minority ruling, clique engaging the people, vanguard's elements for control of the masses. The ruling clique approaches its task with a what to think program. The vanguard elements have the much more difficult job of promoting how to think. No tactic can be ignored or discounted in such a battle. Power responds to all threat. The response is repression. If the threat is a small one, the fascist tactic is to laugh it off, ignore it, isolate it with its defense mechanism, media. The greater the threat, the greater the corresponding violence from power. The only effective challenge to power is one that is broad enough to make it possible. and intensive enough to cause repression to affect the lifestyle of as many members of society as possible. Repression exists on a scale, and repression is the response of the fascist to any threats to its dynamics. And all you end up seeing is not an absence of repression in terms of its response when it's something small scale. It's simply that the repression itself exists on a sliding scale. So, like, if it's a small enough threat, obviously the scale of the repression isn't going to be nearly as big as bigger threats. So the bigger the threat, the more repression we're looking at. So it scales up. So just because you don't see an uptick in repression in any one case or another, doesn't necessarily mean, or at least if you don't see repression on a wide scale, that does not mean the repression itself is not necessarily present. Where there is no repression, or where there is small scale repression, it is because the fascist analysis has led them to perceiving the present threats at small scale. And so that has to be properly understood as well. By compromising and playing at class war, we lose. If some effective means of threatening to wield power is not used in the opening stages of revolutionary activity, repression will concentrate itself on the vanguard elements only, when the ideal situation is for the people to feel the raw essence of power. Nothing can bend consciousness more effectively than a false arrest. Nothing can bend consciousness more effectively than a false arrest, a invasion, careless, panic-stricken gunfire. These will frighten some, anger others. Common sense alone tells me whom the people will turn their anger against. Perhaps for a short time they will be angry at us. But since the pig is a pig, it won't be long before this anger is channeled in the right directions. Revolution builds its stages. It isn't cool or romantic. It's bold and vicious. It's stalking and being stalked. The opposition rising above our level of violence to repress us, and our forces learning how to counter this repression and pulling ourselves above their level of violence. That process repeats itself again and again until finally the level is reached where the real power of the people is felt and the ruling class is suppressed. The power of the people lies in its greater potential violence. And this power of the people, their greater potential violence, can be brought to fruition only if the conditions in an urban society are by the application of Foucault. The Foucault theory grew out of the Cuban Revolution and refers to the more or less slow building up through warfare, strategic force, which would be the nucleus of a people's army. Regis Debray, Revolution in the Revolution, Armed Struggle and Political Struggle in Latin America. New York Monthly Review Press, 1967, page 24. The Foucault theory can be effective only when it does not allow us to isolate people, thus exposing itself to the vastly superior firepower of the corporate state. Our power is in the masses, so isolation is the biggest threat to our power. That's the point there, y'all. So there is no doubt that Fidel was the motor to the revolution in Cuba. But nor can there be any doubt that Fidel's organizational genius made sure that the Foucault remained in the center of the much bigger revolutionary movement, which it controlled or guided for its military advantage. The Foucault may well be the best tactic to mount the motor, but it needs a long period of preparation, intensive organizational work to set up an efficient, reliable machinery, which will not only generate the atmosphere for armed struggle by foot, but will also initiate logistic communications, survival programs, and the traditional communist parties of the world. They are doing that and have been mostly peacefully for 40 years. That is not what Bahar had in mind when he said there have been stages of hard underground life. Bahar and New Left revolutionaries all over the world know very well that a revolutionary lifestyle is a warrior's lifestyle. By stages, he meant stages of combat. And that is precisely the way in which revolution kind of organization capable of leading a people's war. We are at an impasse now because the next level of revolutionary consciousness and activity cannot be without calling down on the nation a corresponding perhaps overreactionary repression. And it's not the people who dread this next level of. They don't understand the significance of it as yet. The dread, the fear, rests with some of the old guard elements. I refer you again to Mao. Quote, when revolution fails, it's the fault of the vanguard party. Some of the fear is an honest fear that revolution will be repressed entirely. These thinkers have historical references that roll them back to Europe and to the time of Hitler's Germany and Italy in the 20s and 30s. But I say that can never happen here. That was too long ago, too far away, and none of those European countries had 30 million irate niggers on their hands. None of that ever had to happen, for the same reason that we don't have to allow it to happen. All reactionary movements depend principally on a handful of individuals, sometimes women. There are many thousands of ways to correct individuals. The best way is to send one armed expert. I don't mean to outshout them with logic. I mean correct him. Slay him. Assassinate him with thuggy. Thuggy? I'll look it up in a second. By silenced pistol, shotgun, with a higher powered rifle, shooting from 400 yards away from the rock. Suffocation, strangulation, crucifixion, burnt with flamethrower, dispatched by bomb. Auto accidents happen all day. People drown, get poleaxed, breathe noxious gases, get stabbed, get poisoned with bad water, rat's bane, germicides, hemlock, arsenic, strychnine, LSD, 25 concentrate, cyanide, hydrocyanic acid, vitriol. A snake could bite him. Nicotine oil is deadly. An overdose of dope. There's deadly nightshade, belladonna, datura, roofsbane, foxglove, aconite, tome, botulism, and the death of 1,000 cuts. But a curse won't work. We're going to have to fight to win. The logic of procrastination has been destroyed. A people can never be so repressed that they can't strike back at someone. We will purge the poltroons and fight, or just ignore them. The reality of power's automatic defense reflexes makes it possible for us to measure our own effectiveness. Their efforts to seriously repress us indicate that we have reached people, that we are finally in the fight. And we cannot ever be truly repressed. There is quite simply no way for an established government to defeat an internal, determined, aggressive enemy, especially in an urban society. The mechanics, logic, and logistics of urban people's guerrilla warfare cannot be defeated. At the opening stages of such a conflict, before a unified left can be established, before most people have accepted before we are able to militarily to organize massive violence, we must depend on limited, selective violence tied to an exact political purpose. In the early service of the people, there must be totally committed professional revolutionaries who understand that all human life is not accompanied by the controls that determine its. I am one of these. My life has absolutely no value. I'm the man under hatches, the desperate one. We will make the revolution. Nothing can stop us. We are not intimidated by the specter of repression. We're already repressed. The Black Legion and their terror leaves us cold, unafraid. We will meet it with a counter-terror. We'll never allow ourselves to be immobilized by a tactic that actually works better for us. The lynch murder of a friend, it makes me angry, not afraid. I'm the next man that must be lynched. My forefather trembled when his brother was lynched, but my brother's immolation means war to the death, war to the utmost, war to the knife. Violence is not supposed to work in America. For no one, that is, except the quote-unquote omnipotent administrator. But this has yet to be proved to my satisfaction, since I know that a bomb is a bomb is a bomb. It twists steel, shatters concrete, and dismembers men everywhere else in the world. Why not those made in America? A bullet fired from an assault rifle in a Vietnamese liberation fighter will kill a pig. Nah. Why won't it kill a pig in the place where pigs are made? Counterterrorism is a facet of urban people's guerrilla warfare. It's our logical response to the repressive measures taken by the in the early. Our military cadre in this activity has the tactical advantage over the establishment terrorists only if clandestine. While working at the direction of a political front, we must remain separate. The ranks of these early soldiers must be absolute pervious to infiltration. Precautions must be made to keep the cadre impenetrable to spies and less committed comrades. In The Coming of the New International, John Garassi observed that, quote, as a leading pragmatist, Lenin believed that the only way a revolution could come about in Europe in his time was by the creation of a revolutionary organization. That organization had to be tight, well-trained, loyal to its central committee, dedicated, and narrow, not only for ideological reasons, hence purges and sectarian splits were encouraged during its formative years, but also for security. And Lenin states that the more we can find the membership of people who are professionally engaged in revolutionary activity and who have been professionally trained in the art of combating the police, the more difficult it will be to unearth the organization. One of Jonathan's reports contains the following. I find it almost impossible to trust comrades, not after all of this. They say Gloves Davis, a black pig, killed Fred Hampton while he was asleep. I certainly don't have to mention all the so-called defectors who are now appearing before government committees testifying for the state. They were infiltrators to begin with. The house niggers who ran to the high sheriff as soon as someone whispered revolt. I think I hate them worse than I hate the owner. I'm just a young slave, you say, trying to understand and cope with my environment. I know personalities have no place in revolution, but every time I think of Davis, Just Be Simple, Karanga, and the rest of these murderous turncoat idiots, my trigger finger fairly. Non-persons like Karanga, Leroy Jones, and the other right-wing blacks are intelligent enough to know what they are doing. We cannot excuse them with the ease that we can excuse the average brother who has had no opportunity or inkling. The mantle of ignorance doesn't cover their behavior. They have to know that when they attack socialism, the communist ideal, and revolution, that they are not logically or illogically depending, attacking all that is white, etc. They know that Ho Chi Minh isn't white or Chairman Mao, or Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Ture. They know that there isn't but one fight going on across this planet, the one between the imperialist forces of capitalism and its victims. They know that it was for work, that we were kidnapped. What else do you feed a slave for? These black men, if you can swallow their shallow shit, have had time to study. Some have traveled. They know that it was capitalist agricultural economics that first caused our pain, and that the only change since then is the decline of the agricultural and the rise of the modern bourgeoisie. A sweatshop displaced the plantation. Could it have escaped their notice that all the African states that really liberated themselves booted out the foreign businessmen and are now socialist states? No. I think the strongest suggestion is that they are working for the government, the new house niggers. And what better way is there for them to sell themselves to us than scream black, 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 like Tom Boya, whose whole service for the CIA was to redirect the revolutionary rage of the people into a thing more compatible with the interest on Western businessmen. They are spies. Death to spies. I don't think it is a personality clash at all for us to teach these black pigs that we will not be altered from our course, that the reward for counter-revolution is death. We cannot continue to expect or wish for loyalty to the people. We'll have to demand it. And that's both for these cowardly fat mouths who come to us in their disguise, cultural nationalism, and from the class defectors who Tommy gun us in our sleep. I'll make an example of Gloves Davis even if I have to hobo to Chicago. They'll find him strung up to a streetlight by his heels with our sign burned at his forehead. Tests must be devised to guard ourselves against the possibility of those fools getting into our separate military groups. There is no way to stop the infiltration of a ground political group, but we can guard the clandestine army by 1. Letting no one choose us, even if they did know about us and could find us. We do the choosing. Once we choose someone to do the people's military work, they should be isolated and tested thoroughly, and their background checked. And for those who want to follow along, the PDF is in the pinned section of this Discord, and we are at the top of page 38. I'll wait about a minute before continuing on. There are patterns to people's lives, especially blacks, that if studied one, can easily spot pig tendencies and connections. Checks could be run through some of our political people who have friends or sympathizers who own, say, used car lots or any business that generally credit. A great deal can be learned through the credit check institutions today. We'll be using one of their own instruments for the real purpose that they invented it against them. Generally, that's the way it will be throughout the war. Testing can be developed into a science, written stuff to help establish for ourselves the pattern of this soldier's background. You know, full commitment generally comes as a result of awareness, and awareness is the product of study and observation. The things a person has gone to the great deal about his character. In other words, very few black intelligence agents will have studied Marx, Mao, Lenin, Fanon, cats like that in depth. You can generally tell what processes a man's mind is going through by what he studied, observed. So examine. Even the post office will do that. Written and oral tests, drugs are not to be discounted either. Oral tests under truth drugs. Then you have the ultimate test, the things that no agent of the establishment, like assassinate the local head of the Gestapo, bring him out of isolation blindfolded, arm him, tell him what to do and where to go afterward, wait. I think you could be fairly sure of him after a series of tests like this. We're only thinking in terms of a small, high, super secret counter Klux's vanguard group. However, dealing with people you've known over the years, being tested and fired already is best, like me, you, and your comrades and mine. The blacks who joined the armed expeditionary profit, the cats who steal them blind and hustle the other suckers, they are starting to stir, to become aware also. This Vietnam adventure on the part of the fascist whole relationship between the masses and the ruling class. Can you detect the subtle changes? The really ugly side of imperialism is being demonstrated for not just the people who suffer its effects abroad, but also to the little sleepy guy here inside the. They're starting now to make the link between foreign wars and foreign business, and they're better able to make the comparisons. Ho Chi Minh versus Kai, for example. People are all starting to say such things as some form of socialism is that. Time to move on. We must show them that resistance is possible, and that there is a hard left cadre willing to lead it. Conditions are right now. And for the beginnings, at least, of a revolutionary culture. These conditions have always been present here at the Black colony, but no leadership until now. And the point he's making here is a couple of pages, getting into this idea of infiltration and acknowledging the political reality. It's almost impossible to stop above ground groups from being infiltrated, but he gives us all kinds of clues how we can guard against the coming infiltration. He says that we can choose our own members in the beginning phases and as a countermeasure. He says when we do choose people that they should be isolated and tested in the field, and we can of course look into their background to see exactly what these people were involved in, do a thorough research. He says people's lives have patterns, and so if we look at the patterns of their lives, generally the kind of work they were getting involved in, we'll be able to know more or less, where a person's actual sympathies lie. So that's something that we can do, and it's something. He says practical work out in the field. The action of that work can't. You can't lie with your actions. Your actions are your actions. So if you haven't been living any kind of life with any kind of intention to serve people, that'll be played out into exactly who you are. So Comrade Jackson is giving us the playbook on how to recruit and how to make sure that counter revolution might make sure that we could do something about the infiltration going to inevitably deal with as we build. So if we can keep the Panther alive by protecting party workers, with a show of underground strength, watching the watcher assassinating the assassin, I think the people will start to listen to them. Blacks have grown very cynical to all groups who make claims in the areas of problem solving, since there have been 1 million groups and no problem solved. And then when he talks about that, he goes on to talk about what was he talking about? He was talking about this idea. Where was that at? I can't find it now. But basically, the idea that praxis is the only thing that is going to win the masses. You can talk about your political program. You could talk about what it takes to win all you want. You could talk about building things are necessary and it's properly understood that they must be a part of our movement in their own place. But nothing replaces the need to actually be out in the field organizing and serving people material needs. Earlier, he was mentioning this idea will often get heavily involved in just like circulating or doing some other like type of organizational work that is like disconnected from the masses and doesn't actually build a relationship with the masses, and that this kind of work plays at revolution but itself counter-revolution because it is presenting itself, as revolutionary mass consciousness raising work when oftentimes it is actually quite the opposite. So these things must be properly understood in order to get a place of what it is we're dealing with. All right. So if we can keep the Panther alive by protecting the party workers with a show of underground strengths, watching the watcher assassinating the assassin, I think the people will start to listen. Blacks have grown very cynical to all groups who make claims in the areas of problem solving, since there have been 1 million groups and no problems. The physical conditions are right for the start of a protracted war. We have yet to hit on the tactic for control of attitudes. However, how to make people organize and resist the ruin of their lives, and it's for certain we'll never figure out the right tactic. Pigs keep killing off and busting all the vanguard elements. The time has come. Bobby's seize the time makes sense. We can't build a mass movement without finding some way to stay alive long enough to know we're here, and that we're not just out to play on them, that we are finally prepared to totally commit ourselves to the fight, but that we will never abandon them when the pig moves in with his pistol and paddy wagon, that we're willing to take it to the graveyard. A show of organizational skill and valid anti-establishmentism always bring on violence from the fascists. The people know this, so they must also know that this violence can be countered before they'll believe and respond. Let the ruling class tremble at a communist revolution. That's my favorite line in all of Marx and Engels. From Fanon, it's, quote, "The time for talking has ended, the time for acting has begun," close quote. Long live the guerrilla. John. The counter-terrorist faceless, nameless specialist in all martial arts is the first soldier of the. His violence will be swift, surprising, explosive, and tied into a clearly political matrix. In some cases of assassination, it may be wise to make them appear as accidents, but that still doesn't reduce the political content. These workers, properly distributed and going about their task with secret, flawless precision and in perfect unison with the political, will shake the fascists to the very foundation. Their limited, highly selective violence is the absolute minimum for enforcing the demands of the people. Anything less will fail. We are not dealing with nice people who will throw down their guns and submit to our will because we outnumber them. From the vantage point of established power in history, they know that one armed man can control 1,000. People's war is not polite or proper. It is not possible to limit the scope and range of violence to what the enemy will bear without reacting. Any ideal, any activity that may do violence to their control will never be permitted. People's war is improvisation and more improvisation. It is organizing the masses around their realistic needs, moving them against whatever forces restrict their passage to power. I repeat, realistic day-to-day needs should be the basis of organizing people, making them conscious of revolution. That the world, the universe must revolve, that it will stop stagnate and die for no man's. If we accept revolution, we must accept all that it implies: repression, Counterterrorism, days filled with work, nervous strain, prison, funerals. Our present problem as soldiers is to protect our people at their work and enforce the increasing demands that the people, as a political result, will make upon power. The soldier is the counterterrorist, the bodyguard, the first of a military vanguard. The distance between him and the class enemy is a free fire zone. He has to be the baddest and strongest of our kind, calm, sure, self-possessed completely. Familiar with the fact that the only thing that stands between black men and violent, fast break, quick draw is snapshot. Terrible Jonathan's teeth on the barrel of the political tool, hardened against the concrete of the most uncivilized jungles of the planet. Chicago, St. Louis, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Tested in a dozen fires. Tall, slim youth. The new nigger, with the gun in the eyes of the hunter of men. These comrades must make the first contribution. They will be the first to fall. We gather up their bodies, clean them, kiss them, and smile. Their funerals should be gala affairs of home-brewed wine and revolutionary music to dance of death by. We should be sad only that it's taken us so many to them. Building consciousness and revolutionary culture against the repressive, natural defense reflexes of the system means taking realistic day-to-day issues like hunger, the need for clothing and housing, joblessness. It involves provoking repression, feeding on it. The fact of political economic prisoners in legions and the oppressors to judge and condemn them must be used as the rallying cry. Economic crime and even crimes of passion against the oppressor must be understood as rebellion. Even funerals can be used as an issue, as there will be so many of them. Improvising on reality is the key principle underlying the building of a united consciousness. It will give us our tactic. In the black colony and other depressed areas, there will be less difficulty in organizing, mobilizing, and altering the attitudes of people to the enemy. However, in the areas of the class affecting attitudes toward a revolutionary change in the system of production and distribution will of course call for the destruction of their comfort, the manufacturing of a condition neutral or complementary to the revolutionary. The psychological effect of our secret army, the real destructive effect it can have, an increasingly pervasive underground style, the popularization of the revolutionary culture, and then the elevating of it, both under the direction of an ultra-aggressive political. These three, with no element missing, connected to our only hope, form the basis of our only hope. There will be no educating, no consciousness, no revolutionary culture, no forward movement without these three elements working with the harmony of a. To sum up, the existence of a political vanguard precedes the existence of any of the other elements truly revolutionary. If the thrust of this political vanguard demonstrating realistic, sincere designs aimed at the overthrow of established power, it will be attacked by the built-in automatics, creating and supporting the need to counter the violence of power. Without the ability to organize a counterforce to neutralize the violence of established power, antithesis dies. We are not contending with fools who allow us to simply walk in and organize people against them. All serious challenges will be met with panic and repression. That is axiomatic. We must not allow ourselves to be hunted, imprisoned, and murdered. We will never yield to terror tactics. We will organize a violence of our own, hidden and more aggressive. We fight from a position of weakness, but there are tactical devices that, if employed without restraint, will afford us a very real advantage. So that's a good place for us to wrap up discussion. He's getting into a lot of important. He's telling us what the material reality of being revolutionary. Expect repression, death, panic. He just gets into our expectations that we're not dealing with the kind of people who are just going to sit back and watch while we organize against their interests, and that if anything serious were to take off the ground, we can expect them to respond to that with overwhelming violence, overwhelming force, and we have to organize with that in mind. But we don't have to just accept the inevitability of our own deaths. We can organize against the of state oppression as well. He brings up that what can be done to a pig and can be done to a pig right here, and that revolution isn't simply that only people of the global South are capable of participating in. Can make revolution if they're willing to, with revolutionary things, grow the conscious. So he's spitting on a lot of good ideas. So we stopped at the top of page 44, and we'll continue from there. Next week we'll be meeting again on Monday at 5 EST, and that's kind of for the foreseeable future be the time that it looks. Till then, a couple join me. Thanks y'all for joining me. I hope y'all enjoyed. This will be up on Friday at noon. Until then, y'all take care of yourselves. Peace.